was the kind of night that felt alive. The air was dense with the promise of a storm, and the clouds hung low, smothering the faint light of the moon. I had been wandering, my thoughts as aimless as my steps, when the sign caught my eye. A crooked wooden plank hanging precariously above a narrow doorway. Faded gold lettering spelled out, "Curiosities and Relics." Something about it felt off. The building seemed forgotten, wedged between two towering apartment blocks like a shadow lost in daylight. The windows were caked with grime, the glass warping reflections of the empty street behind me. I don't know why I pushed the door open. Maybe it was the sudden gust of wind that howled through the alley, or maybe it was the faint glimmer I thought I saw in the window. A flicker of something inviting, beckoning. The door creaked on its hinges as I stepped inside. The shop smelled of damp wood and rusted metal, the air thick as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. Shelves were crammed with strange items, tarnished silverware, cracked porcelain dolls, jars of indeterminate contents floating in murky liquid. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, its weak glow casting shadows that seemed to breathe. I should have left. I wanted to leave. But my gaze fell on a small glass case near the back of the room. The glass was cracked, spiderwebbed with age, and inside lay a necklace. Delicate, almost dainty, with an obsidian pendant that seemed to drink in the dim light around it. The chain was thin but sturdy, its surface tarnished to a deep, burnished black. I moved closer, drawn to it in a way that didn't feel entirely my own. My fingers hovered above the case as if some unseen force guided them. "It chooses you," a voice rasped, breaking the silence and sending a jolt down my spine. I turned sharply to see a woman standing behind the counter. Her frame was slight, her skin as pale as parchment, and her eyes, hollow, gray, and unblinking, seemed older than the shop itself. She moved with an unsettling stillness, placing a bony hand on the case. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice more breathless than I intended. "It chooses its owner," she said simply. "You don't find it. It finds you." Her hand lifted the lid, and before I could protest, she placed the necklace in my palm. It was cold, unnaturally cold, like it had been pulled from the depths of a frozen lake. "This necklace has a history," she murmured, her gaze fixed on the pendant as though it might spring to life. "A dark one. Many before you have tried to resist, but it's too late now. It's yours." I should have walked away, thrown it on the floor, fled into the night and never looked back. But instead I found myself handing over a few crumpled bills, tucking the necklace into my pocket, and stepping out into the storm. Behind me, the shop door slammed shut. The sound echoed far too loudly for such a small space, as if the building itself had exhaled and sealed me out. I didn't notice the whispers until much later. The whispers began as faint murmurs, just on the edge of my hearing. At first, I thought it was the wind slipping through the cracks in my apartment's old windows. I lived on the top floor of a crumbling building, where the floors creaked with every step, and the pipes groaned like restless spirits. Nothing unusual, I told myself. But that night, the apartment felt different. I'd placed the necklace on my nightstand, the obsidian pendant catching the faint glow of the street lamp outside. It looked oddly out of place, almost defiant against the mundane clutter of my life. An old alarm clock, a dog-eared book, a crumpled receipt. Yet it commanded my attention. The whispers grew louder as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. They weren't words, not at first. Just an indistinct hum, like a crowd murmuring behind a closed door. But as the hours dragged on, the hum sharpened, turning into voices. "Wear it." I bolted upright, heart hammering. The room was dark, the air thick and unmoving, but I swore I heard it, soft, insistent, coaxing. The necklace sat motionless where I'd left it, its polished surface gleaming faintly in the shadows. I told myself I was imagining things, that the strange shopkeeper and her ominous warnings had gotten under my skin. The next day, I wore it. I don't know why. Maybe I thought it would quiet the voices, or maybe some deeper part of me had already surrendered. The chain felt unnaturally cool against my skin as I clasped it around my neck. For a moment I felt nothing, just the weight of the pendant resting lightly on my chest. But as the hours passed, the world seemed to shift around me. It started small. My phone slipped from my grip and cracked on the concrete as I walked to work. A bus screeched to a halt inches from where I was crossing the street. My coworker spilled scalding coffee across my desk, missing my hand by a hair. By lunchtime, I was rattled. Every moment felt heavy, as if something unseen was pressing against the edges of my reality. At my desk, I found myself fidgeting with the pendant, running my fingers over its cold, smooth surface. Each time I touched it, a chill crept up my spine, sharp and electric. That night, the whispers returned, louder and more distinct. "Not an accident," they said. The words made my skin crawl. I sat up in bed, staring into the darkness, my breath coming in shallow bursts. The air in the room felt charged, and the shadows seemed deeper, more alive. A sound came from the corner, a faint scraping like nails on wood. I turned sharply, my eyes searching the blackness. Nothing moved, yet I felt watched, as though something stood just out of sight, its presence pressing against the thin veil of darkness. I yanked the necklace off, or tried to. The clasp wouldn't budge no matter how hard I pulled. My chest tightened as panic set in, my fingers fumbling uselessly. In the silence that followed, a single word whispered through the room, low and unmistakable. "Mine." The word lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. My breath came shallow and quick, the darkness around me pressing closer with every second. I scrambled to my feet, my fingers clawing at the chain around my neck, but it was no use. The clasp held firm, as if welded shut. I turned on the bedside lamp, bathing the room in a dim yellow glow. The shadows retreated, but the oppressive feeling remained. My reflection in the mirror across the room caught my eye. At first, it looked normal, just my pale, sweat-dampened face staring back. But then it shifted. The necklace seemed darker, heavier, the obsidian pendant pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. And my reflection, it wasn't quite right. The way it stared felt wrong, its eyes too wide, too knowing. Slowly, its mouth twisted into a small, cruel smile, though I hadn't moved a muscle. I stumbled back, knocking over the lamp in my panic. Darkness engulfed the room again, and the whispers returned, louder now, overlapping like a cacophony of voices arguing just beneath the surface of my mind. "Give in. Stay. Run." I couldn't take it anymore. Grabbing my coat, I fled the apartment, the necklace still cold against my skin. The streets were eerily quiet for such a late hour, the distant hum of the city muffled as if the world itself was holding its breath. My only thought was to get answers. The historian's office was in an old brick building downtown, the kind of place that reeked of mildew and forgotten stories. I'd found his name during my frantic search online. Dr. Samuel Graves, an expert in cursed artifacts and folklore. He didn't pick up when I called earlier, but his profile listed his office hours and I was desperate enough to hope he'd still be there. When I reached his door, I pounded on it with trembling fists. The sound echoed down the empty hallway, and for a moment, I thought no one would answer. Then, a lock clicked, and the door creaked open just enough for a gaunt, bespectacled man to peer out. "Dr. Graves?" I gasped. "I need your help." His gaze shifted to the pendant at my throat, and his face blanched. He pulled the door open wider and gestured for me to enter. "You shouldn't be wearing that," he said, his voice low and urgent. "It's older than you realize. Older than most things we know." I sat down across from him, the tiny office crowded with bookshelves that groaned under the weight of dusty tomes. Papers were strewn across the desk, many of them depicting strange symbols and eerie sketches. "What is it?" I asked, gripping the pendant instinctively. "It's a tether," he said, his eyes dark with something close to fear. "A fragment of something that should never have existed. That necklace doesn't just carry a curse, it carries a hunger, a need. It attaches itself to you, feeding on your fear, your pain. The more you resist, the tighter its grip becomes." I felt the weight of his words settle in my chest like lead. "How do I get rid of it?" I whispered. His gaze flickered to a worn book on his desk, its leather cover embossed with unfamiliar glyphs. "There might be a way," he said slowly, "but it won't be easy. And if you fail..." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The whispers in my head surged, louder and more insistent, as if the necklace was mocking me. "You can't escape." Dr. Graves leafed through the brittle pages of his book, the worn parchment crackling under his fingers. His office felt smaller, the air dense with something I couldn't name. He stopped on a page covered in a tangle of arcane symbols and scribbled notes, his lips pressed into a thin line. "There's a ritual," he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not a cure, but it can sever the bond. At least for you." "For me?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What happens to it after?" His expression darkened. "The curse doesn't end, it finds another. That's how these things work. It's older than us, older than our understanding. But if you don't do this..." He let the silence hang, his meaning clear. He handed me a list of items: black salt, a silver mirror, a strand of my own hair, and a litany of phrases in a language that felt wrong even to read. "You'll need to go to where it began," he said, pointing to a line in the notes. "The graveyard where the curse was first bound to the necklace. Midnight. That's when its power is weakest, and you'll have a chance to break free." I wanted to argue, to demand an easier way, but the weight around my neck pulsed, a sharp sting like ice burrowing into my skin. The whispers began to rise again, louder and mocking, their words overlapping into a chaotic drone. "Futile. You are mine." The graveyard was exactly as I imagined, desolate, forgotten, and suffused with an eerie silence that made my footsteps sound like gunshots. Overhead, the sky churned, heavy clouds blotting out the moon. The gate creaked as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the overgrown tombstones. I found the spot easily. Dr. Graves had marked it on an old map, a weathered gravestone with no name, its edges chipped and worn smooth by time. Around it, the grass grew wild, untouched by the living. I sat up quickly, my hands shaking as I poured the black salt into a circle around me. I placed the mirror in the center, the silver surface reflecting the shadows that twisted unnaturally in the dim light of my lantern. The pendant throbbed against my chest, heavier than ever, as if it knew what I was about to do. Taking a deep breath, I lit the candle and began the incantation. The words felt foreign on my tongue, each syllable a jagged edge that scraped against the air. The shadows around me seemed to writhe in response, their movements unnatural, like limbs bending where no joints should be. Halfway through the ritual, the whispers turned into screams. The necklace burned against my skin, the heat searing into my chest as the ground beneath me trembled. Then I saw her. The woman from my dreams emerged from the shadows, her veiled face pale and hollow. Her hands were skeletal, her fingers impossibly long as they reached for me. Her voice cut through the night, low and venomous. "You dare defy me?" The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to continue the incantation as the air around me grew colder, biting at my skin. She stepped closer, her presence pressing against me like a tidal wave of dread. The mirror cracked, spiderwebbing with fractures, and I felt the necklace tighten, as if it was trying to strangle me. I gasped for air, the pendant burning hotter, its whispers now a cacophony of rage. With the last line of the incantation, I threw the necklace onto the mirror and lit the strand of my hair. The flame caught immediately, unnaturally bright, and the pendant began to scream, not in a voice, but in a sound that pierced my skull and rattled my bones. The woman shrieked, her form flickering like a shadow caught in a violent wind. "You cannot escape me!" she roared, her face twisting into something monstrous. And then, silence. The mirror shattered completely, and the necklace lay in pieces, lifeless and cold. I collapsed to the ground, my chest heaving, the oppressive weight finally gone. But as I looked at the broken shards, a chill ran through me. For just a moment, I thought I saw her face in the reflection, watching, waiting. I sat in the dirt, the chill of the graveyard sinking into my bones as I stared at the broken shards of the mirror. My breath clouded the air, ragged and uneven. The shattered pieces glittered faintly in the lantern's weak glow, their sharp edges reflecting fractured glimpses of the graveyard around me. But it was the memory of her face, her hollow eyes, her venomous snarl, that held me captive. The necklace was gone, reduced to crumpled fragments that no longer carried the impossible weight I had felt for days. My chest was raw where the chain had burned into my skin, leaving behind an angry red welt that seemed to throb with its own pulse. But I was alive. The oppressive whispers had stopped, the air around me still and heavy with the silence of the dead. For a fleeting moment I thought it was over. I gathered what I could, my lantern, the bag of black salt, the burnt remnants of the ritual, and began the walk back to my car. The graveyard stretched out before me, its rows of decaying headstones swallowed by the night. I didn't look back, afraid that if I did, I might see her standing there, veiled and waiting. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles white as I forced myself to focus on the road. The night pressed against the windows, the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows across the dashboard. Every so often, I thought I saw movement in the rearview mirror, a flicker of something in the back seat. But when I glanced, there was nothing. By the time I reached my apartment, exhaustion had set in. I collapsed onto the couch, my body aching, and my mind a storm of frayed nerves. The apartment was still, the usual creaks and groans of the old building oddly absent. I tried to tell myself that it was over, that I had broken the necklace's hold. But deep down, I wasn't sure. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by fragmented dreams of her veiled figure and the whispered word, mine. I woke up gasping, the room bathed in the pale gray light of dawn. My chest ached where the welt throbbed faintly, but the necklace was gone. I told myself again, it was over. Days passed. Life began to feel normal, or at least something close to it. The nightmares faded, and the oppressive sense of being watched slowly dissipated. Dr. Graves called once to check in, his voice cautious as he asked if I had experienced anything unusual. I assured him everything was fine. But then, last night, something changed. As I walked past a small pawn shop on my way home from work, I froze. In the window, surrounded by dusty trinkets and tarnished jewelry, was the necklace. The same obsidian pendant, its surface polished to a dark gleam, rested on a velvet cushion. My stomach dropped. I stepped closer, pressing my hand against the glass, my breath fogging the surface. It couldn't be. I had destroyed it, burned it to ashes, shattered its pieces into nothing. And yet there it was, whole and gleaming as if it had never been broken. Inside, the shopkeeper, a man I had never seen before, looked up and caught my eye. He smiled faintly, nodding in greeting. Behind him, the necklace seemed to pulse faintly, like a heartbeat. I turned and walked away, my pulse racing. But as I reached the corner, I heard it again. A whisper, soft, mocking, inescapable. Mine.